Folks, it's time for us to look at all of these white-dominated police departments and to require that every single officer within those departments, whether they are white, brown, or black, undergo a brand new and complete background check. And that background check should be reviewed by a panel of white people, brown people, Hispanics, Asians, and black people. And if the officer does not receive at least 75% approval for his employment, that he should be summarily dismissed. Now, I say that because I honestly believe that white supremacists have infiltrated and dominate the majority, if not all, of the majority white police departments in this country. And folks, I believe it goes further than that. I believe that white supremacists not only dominate police departments in this country, but they also dominate our judicial system, i.e. district attorneys and judges. Now, I say that after reviewing this particular story regarding a person who I believe to be a white supremacist who killed a black man in the St. Louis area. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Jason Stockley. Mr. Stockley was acquitted of murdering a black suspect when there was more than enough evidence to convict him. Now, I'm going to read this particular story for your hearing, and then I'm going to go on to a couple of other stories that will support my viewpoint that there is no justice in the justice system for people of color, and in particular black men. White ex-St. Louis cop acquitted in black suspect's killing. A judge acquitted a white former St. Louis police officer of murder in the 2011 killing of a black drug suspect, a decision that could spark protests with National Guard troops on standby. Now, you'll note, this is 2017, and they didn't get around to actually prosecuting this particular police officer or ex-police officer for 6 flipping years. Speedy trial, huh? Okay, anyway, Judge Timothy Wilson found the former officer Jason Stockley not guilty of first-degree murder in the fatal shooting of 24-year-old Anthony Lamar Smith. The bench ruling came more than a month after testimony concluded. Activists had threatened civil disobedience if Stockley was acquitted, and authorities took steps to deal with that scenario. All 3 downtown courthouses, including the federal courthouse and some city schools, were closed in anticipation of the verdict, so they knew what was coming. The police department said officers will be working 12-hour shifts starting Friday, and Mayor Lita Crewson said the State Highway Patrol and St. Louis County Police would provide support, with the patrol handling any protest on state highways. Republican Governor Eric Grittens, meanwhile, put the National Guard on standby in case of unrest. He and the mayor urged protesters to be peaceful, a sentiment echoed by Smith's fiancée, Christina Wilson. Here's a look at the case. Stockley and his partner saw what appeared to be a drug transaction in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant on December 20, 2011. As the officer sought to corner Smith, he drove away. Stockley's defense attorney, Neil Bruntrager, said that the officers were nearly run over by Stockley and, run over, and Stockley fired at the fleeing car. Then a car chase began. Police dashcam video captured Stockley saying, "Going to kill this," well, it's an expletive, but it probably starts with an N. "Don't you know it?" In the midst of the chase, as Smith's car slowed, Stockley told his partner to slam the police SUV into it, and his partner did so. Stockley then got out of the SUV and fired 5 shots into Smith's car, killing him. Bruntrager said Stockley fired only after Smith refused commands to put up his hands and reach alongside the seat towards an area where a gun was found. But prosecutors said Stockley planted the gun. Testing found Stockley's DNA on the gun, but not Smith's. Okay. They jump up and down so much about DNA, but how is DNA found on what is supposedly the gun that Mr. Smith had, but Mr. Smith's DNA is not found on the gun whatsoever? And in the area that they found the DNA, the only way it could have been put there was when Mr. Stockley was actually handling the gun, okay? More than likely cleaning it and putting it back together. This is ridiculous. It doesn't matter, folks. It doesn't matter anymore. In the past, it used to be your word against the police officer's word, and if you had no physical evidence supporting your position, it was always the police officer's word that was taken as the Holy Grail. But with the advent of video cameras, that supposedly was going to change. But we saw in the case of the gentleman in Los Angeles who got the crap beat out of him, and there was a video evidence that the police basically beat this guy up, and I forget his name, but it's the guy that said, can't we all just get along? It was the beating that sparked the LA riots. And again, you know, I forgot his name, but video evidence wasn't enough to convict those police officers in the very first case. So the federal government came in and tried those police officers on civil rights violations, and it was only then that they got a guilty verdict. But those officers did not spend any time in jail, okay? They spent no time in jail. Now, this particular case and the case of Freddie Gray, where a person goes into a police van, walking, not paralyzed, comes out of a police van, paralyzed, and survives 2 weeks and dies, but again, no accountability there. You have the McDonald case in Chicago, where absolutely there was a major police cover-up to the point that the police actually went in and tampered with evidence. Okay, we're still waiting for the trial on that one. Meanwhile, all of the officers who issued their police reports backing up the officer that killed that gentleman, they almost to a man had been allowed to retire from the Chicago Police Department. Okay, you have the situation down in South Carolina where the police officer basically shot a suspect in the back, went to trial twice, got hung juries twice, and finally, after a plea bargain, he agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges for lesser time in jail. Okay? You have the situation down in Texas where a couple of black kids were in their car driving away, and a police officer decides that he's going to open fire on the police car. I'm sorry, I said police car. Open fire on their car. And we're still waiting for that particular trial to start. And that one is basically cut and dry. There have been so many of these cases where these white police officers basically gun down and kill black citizens, but for whatever reason, either the district attorney, obviously a white district attorney, but there was one case, and I'm going to bring that one up. They don't feel that charges are warranted. Now, there was a black district attorney, may he rest in hell, in Brooklyn, New York, in the case of where the Asian police officer, rookie, on a darkened staircase, hears sounds and decides to fire his weapon, killing a black man walking down the steps in a Brooklyn housing project. The district attorney there was a black man, and he decided not to bring charges. Approximately a year later, he was taking a dirt nap, if you know what I mean. And in my opinion, based on how he handled that particular case, he deserved it. But there are just too many of these things, folks. Now, for your hearing and understanding, as far as the justice system basically just running roughshod over black men, the latest case is the case of Karan Davis. He's been held in a county jail for 8 years without a trial. Now, you say to yourself, how can that be? Constitutional rights state that you are entitled to a speedy trial. Well, I guess in this particular case, they consider 8 years, and obviously, actually, it's more than 8 years, but they consider someone going to trial for after 8 years being speedy. Now, this also falls in the area of black people not being able to obtain the same rights as their white counterparts, because there was another case in the state of Mississippi where a man was held in jail without trial for 10 years because and I'm going to just say it, Grand Dragon Ku Klux Klan district attorney decided that he was just going to hang on to this guy. And when he lost the election in his particular county and a black district attorney was elected to the position, that black district attorney took one look at this case, went before the judge, and told the judge that there was no basis for prosecution and let that man go. Folks, the police have a history. And if you don't know what the history of the police are, let me tell you. Prior to 1865, individuals which we now know as police had a different name. They were known as slave catchers. And they were predominantly of Irish descent. That's why today, when there's a funeral for a police officer, the instrument of choice as they're marching in the funeral are bagpipes. Well, anyway, these Irish people were considered low class and barely white, but in order for them to earn their stripes, they took positions as slave catchers, and they handled those positions with relish. But after 1865, since slavery was outlawed in the United States, they needed other employment. Well, there you have the formation of the police departments. Basically, a different name for the same job, harassing, mutilating, and killing black people. And again, they did it with a relish, and in particular in the South. But the North doesn't get away with being holier than thou. If you were not aware of it, the state of Missouri is under a travel advisory, and not just any ordinary travel advisory. The NAACP has issued a travel advisory for people of color, and in particular black people, not to travel to the state of Missouri if at all possible. Reason being, the state of Missouri is basically one of the hotbeds of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, you may or may not believe me, but you can go to the Southern Poverty Law Center and do your own research, and you can see for yourself the large number of Ku Klux Klan white supremacist groups that are located in the state of Missouri. Now, hey, don't get me wrong. Honestly, I am not a fan of police officers of any denomination, color, or race. Just not in me, because I've had too many bad experiences with them. And to date, you know, every time I've gone up against them, I'm not even going to say pretty much, I've won every single time. Every time I've had to go into court, I've won. Now, is that just dumb luck? Or was it because I had the financial wherewithal to hire outstanding legal representation that basically got my situation handled for me? And I'm willing to believe that that is more so the case, because people of color without financial means get these bullshit public defenders who may have goodness in their heart, but their workloads are so ridiculous that they basically just consider anyone that they're representing being not a person but a number, and their job is to move cases, whether they can get a person off, plea bargain a person down, or get in and out of court quickly. That's not justice, folks. Now, you know, it is what it is, but until we can get this situation rectified, and by that I mean clear out all of these police officers, because in my opinion, there's no such thing as a good police officer. Okay, there may be a fairly neutral police officer, but a good police officer looks around, sees issues within his own department, and says something. If you don't say something about a bad police officer, then you are complicit with everything that they do. And there is a whole lot of dirt that has been done by police officers against black people. Now, earlier I said that all of the white-dominated police departments need to come under review, and background checks need to be done on all of these officers. When I say background checks, I mean they need to undergo severe psychological testing, and not just by one doctor, but by at least 2 doctors. The reason I say 2 doctors is because there are some doctors that will give a mentally unbalanced police officer a clean bill of health. And I say that because of the case of a psychologist that various police departments use, and I believe it was in the state of California, and that psychologist, it was a female, was convicted and had to do 5 years in jail for falsifying records. It was so bad with this woman that she would just sign off on psychological profiles without even seeing the officers that she was signing off on. So I want not 1 but 2 psychological profiles done on police officers. Then I want to, as far back as they can go, that's their social media, and obviously it's going to entail any political affiliations that they have. Now, there's nothing wrong with certain political affiliations if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an Independent, etc. But if you were a Klan member, a white supremacist supporter, etc., 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 that should automatically disqualify you from being a police officer. I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel. Now, as far as district attorneys are concerned, we need to hold them accountable. Now, most district attorneys are elected officials, and there's not a whole hell of a lot we can do with the election of a district attorney or even a judge, because a lot of these judges are elected, though some are appointed. But when we see patterns arise that police officers aren't treated equally with regular citizens but are given favorable treatment, we need to do something with the district attorney that is proposing the favorable treatment, and we need to do something about the judges that are granting this favorable treatment. If you look hard enough, there are patterns. There are patterns everywhere. It's time for us to open our eyes, unclog our ears, and do what we need to do to get these bastards out of public office and off of the bench that are not going to give us the justice that we deserve. Now, in my mind, this is just another Philando Castile deal, Tamir Rice deal. I mean, there are just too many of these situations that are occurring, which is saying to police officers, no matter what you do, as long as you do it to a black person, you have nothing to fear. And it's time for us, one way or the other, to put the fear of something into the hearts of these police officers, these dirty cops, these murderers, so that they know one way or another justice is going to be served, whether it's inside the court system or outside of the court system. They need to know that they are going to be held accountable by someone. And that's just my feeling about this, folks, because this is just too much. Anytime you have evidence that a police officer has planted a gun to back up his story, and you ignore that evidence, that just tells me you're as dirty and complicit in the murder of any individual as the person who pulled the trigger. And that's how I feel about that police officer, that's how I feel about his partner, and that's how I feel about the judge.